Let's see here. Well, there, good people. Hi, it is Wednesday, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, which is once again time for another live stream. How's everybody doing out there? Of course, I am Jason with greencountryagroforestry, as the shirt says. I'm feeling a little blue today. I've got this high UV light plugged in over here to try to get some foliage on my plants. So let's unplug that and make the light a little bit more natural. All right, there we go. Well, tonight's topic is habitat for humans. We've been talking about establishing habitats for all kinds of wild critters out there around your property. Oh boy. All right, got the mic unmuted again. Had a little snag for a minute there. All right, so where was I? Oh, yes. Sorry about the technical difficulty there. So last couple of weeks we've been talking about establishing habitats for all kinds of wild critters and plants and other things around your properties. But we don't want to forget the most important of those wild critters, which is, well, us, unless you want to be domesticated. But tonight we're going to talk about being cavemen, or at least high-tech cavemen. Let me go ahead and do a screen share here. So there is a picture up there of 66 million years ago. Hi, kitty. Yes. So it was close to 66 million years ago that we had an asteroid strike close to the northern end of the Yucatan Peninsula. It left a crater about 125 miles across. And as of February 24th of this year, scientists working at the University of Texas in Austin were able to conclusively link that impact site, which is just off the coast near Chicxulub, Mexico, to the extinction level event that eliminated 75% of life on the planet. That was near the end of the Cretaceous period. That's what happened to the dinosaurs. The UT researchers were able to place the dust settling of the impact to within 2 decades and speculated that the global winter could have been as short as that. But one thing that they were not aware of is some research that came about from the Mount Pinatubo eruption in 1991 in the Philippines. And we now know that even the low density ash from a major volcanic eruption, such as that one, will have mostly settled out within a matter of weeks or even days, not years. So we're not talking about a massive global winter that stretches on for decades. If anything, we would have had a slight hiccup, maybe a year without a summer as a result of even that massive of an impact. So the mechanism responsible for most of the world's megafauna and megaflora of that time had to have been accomplished by a different mechanism. So now we're trying to figure out what in the world that mechanism was. And there's another extinction level event, not exactly to the extent of the 66 million KP boundary extinction level event that occurred around 13,000 years ago, give or take. All right, this one was the Younger Dryas impact, and it's speculative that the Younger Dryas impact occurred because right now, not all of the science is completed. There have been a few sites that have been tested looking for evidence of impact, and a handful of sites show evidence of an impact at about that time. Other suspected sites are plus or minus a few hundred years. So it may be possible that we're looking at multiple impacts over an extended period of time. Perhaps a body broke up on a close pass with the Earth, and then through subsequent years kept on dropping off fragments over and over and over again. But every time it did, more and more atmosphere would have been lost. And that's what the problem is whenever you have big cometary or asteroid impacts hitting the Earth. It's not the nuclear winter, it's the sudden loss of atmosphere that comes along with it. So, took about 30 million years for large animals to build back up after that uh, Chicxulub, if I can pronounce that properly, meteor impact. And then those critters lasted to within about 5 million years, or sorry, about 5,000 years ago in the past was the last we saw of them. That second impact at around 13,000 years ago would have made some serious changes for large animals. Of course, the big difference between dinosaurs and woolly mammoths and human beings is dinosaurs and woolly mammoths don't have opposable thumbs. They don't have the ability to reason, and they don't have the ability to use that intellect and capacity to change and adapt to the environment whenever the environment changes. So they went extinct. We survived. Let me get back up here and have a look. Hello, Robert. Wow, not many people out there tonight. Oh, get some coffee in me. And come up to here. All right, so the Younger Dryas period was a global cooling event that commenced nearly 13,000 years ago, and it is suspected that it began when meltwater lakes on the receding glaciers burst, sending out vast amounts of water into the world's oceans, which halted the circulation of warm currents from the tropics up to the polar regions, or down to the polar regions, depending upon what side of the planet you're looking at. Any human being living at the time would have been able to witness sudden rises in water levels, especially in coastal areas and low-lying inland waterways, and survivors would have been telling tales of great floods and unusual torrential rains that lasted for extended periods afterwards. Now, if the bursting of those lakes had been precipitated by what we suspect now was a cometary impact, losing atmosphere, which eventually triggered the loss of those large land mammals, mammoths, the giant sloths, the woolly rhinoceroses, the giant deer, and things of that nature, then those tales would also recount another interesting occurrence, which would be large animals of all sorts disappearing and lifespans becoming shorter because there's less oxygen per breath whenever we breathe in. So our wounds don't heal as fast. We don't release stem cells from our bone marrow as readily. We don't regenerate the way we would at a more dense atmosphere. And this is a problem that goes back to a long time ago in paleontology when we looked at the old Cretaceous period and speculated about how those creatures could have gotten so big. They must have had a tremendous amount of food, and one of the suggestions was there must have been a greater concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere at the time, maybe as much as 4 times, to allow that vast amount of food for those huge creatures. But the other half of the problem is those huge creatures don't have an exceptionally large lung capacity, so the concentration of oxygen had to have been higher too. And there's only one thing that I can think of that would explain that large amount of oxygen and that large amount of CO2 at the same time, and that is a more dense atmosphere. This is what we have lost due to global catastrophes such as cometary and asteroid impacts over time. Well, let's have a look at my next slide here, which is a picture of a cave. This is a strategy that old humans would have used whenever the climate changes around them, especially if they didn't have extreme technological means at the moment. You can always take shelter in a cave. And it's a great choice because your temperature stays below ground, between 20 and 30 feet below ground, and in some places higher, to within 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit all year round. So if you've got a year-long winter event going on outside, or it became unseasonably hot for a time period, primitive man could survive in a cave and be just comfortable inside there and only go out when necessary. Of course, the downside to making a living in a cave is the size and the location of the cave are entirely up to nature. Usually you only find them around old volcanic sites, lava tubes, and around limestone. So if your potential source of food and water wasn't near a cave, you either had to hike a long way to get to your food and water, or you just couldn't live there. So people started building artificial caves wherever they could. For example, you've got the Mesa Verde complex in the United States that housed up to 1,500 people at one point in time, or the vast complex of underground cities in the Anatolia region in Turkey, the largest of which was Derinkuyu, which had a population in the tens of thousands. I'll show you a picture of just like one of the rooms in there. This was all carved out of soft volcanic rock that they were able to carve out. And these cavernous cities would go down anywhere from 5 to up to 12 or even 13 levels, like floors, stories below ground. They were huge, and people would live in these. Well, in the current era, artificial caves are made mostly of wood and brick, sometimes out of glass and steel. Chances are you live in one now. In order to compensate for the inherent lack of temperature control, they're heated by burning fossil fuels or sometimes wood, and are cooled by way of machines that run on electrical power. As anyone who's ever experienced a prolonged power outage during a winter ice storm can attest to, those are some very serious and potentially life-threatening design flaws. These homes that we live in are completely dependent upon a functioning supply chain in order to remain habitable, and as such are not permaculture habitats. Perhaps there's a way we can get some advantage of having an actual cave, but still have our own artificial caves built where we want them. I'll show you another picture here. This is just sort of a teaser. This isn't a real dwelling. This is a photo from the Hobbiton movie set for the movie The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. It's out in New Zealand. And behind this door is just a tool storage shed. There's not actually a house under that. But that doesn't mean that we can't build them like this. They have this nice quaint charm to them. And I kind of like this touch that they have right here along the walkway. That's lavender that somebody planted there. So if a person was walking out the door and out into the world, they would be brushing up against the lavender and guarding themselves from mosquito bites in the process. Hello, Sassafras Red. Let's see. I remember reading this when I was, I think, 7 or 8 years old. In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit. And that's the way Tolkien started his famous book. That was in 1937. But at that time, the concept of living in the hole in the ground seemed quaint. We'd gotten out of the habit, apparently. Perhaps even a bit charming, but practical, I don't know. Although people have been using some form of geosheltering and other for as long as there have been people, the concepts didn't really begin to make a reappearance in the modern era until the 1970s, when building earth ships out of rammed earth and old tires or cob-style houses began to become more common. But to this day, houses of this type are still associated with counterculture, and that association might be one of the reasons that they've never had a more prominent place in modern architecture. There's also difficulties in meeting universal building codes and the perception that these kinds of structures are somehow unsafe. And maybe that perception comes from the counterculture. The people are unsafe, the houses are unsafe. You don't want to associate with those sorts of dwellings. They're, malingerers, dope smokers, and draft dodgers, after all. Doesn't change the fact that it's a really good idea. The picture above, of course, was from the Hobbit set. But to build a house like that, you might start with a basic concrete dome structure and then bury it or partially bury it. One of the things I've noticed doing excavations of old sites is any place where you had a concrete slab that's been buried, the concrete's well preserved. Wherever that slab is exposed to weather, it has a tendency to erode and chip and crack. But wherever it's buried, the concrete stays fresh, almost as fresh as the day that it was first laid down. So burying concrete is a great way to preserve it, and it stays structurally sound for a long, long time. There are examples of concrete from the Roman times, or perhaps even before then, that are still structurally sound. And part of the reason that they've remained that way is because they remained buried. So we can use some modern construction techniques to greatly improve the aesthetics and the durability of geo-sheltered homes. And there's a few companies that do that to this day. Let me share a link or two here. Get this up. One of them is Green Magic. Hello, Cliffside Permaculture and Britain Farm Homestead. All right. We have greenmagichomes.com is one of those. And let me find the other place. Green Magic sells polymer shells. They're basically the forms that you can then assemble on site and use glue and screws to hold them together. And from that point, you can either finish them by going ahead and adding a reinforced concrete coating over the top of that and then burying it, or as they would recommend, burying with up to 8 inches of dirt over the top of that polymer frame. And then they'll support an additional 44 pounds of living material per square foot over the top of that. Maybe you don't want to get that hands-on, and incidentally, these aren't really entirely cheap. The smaller models you can get for around 10, 12,000, but you can get large scale modular pieces to put together to build any size dwelling you want. Because they're modular, you can fit them together and form a variety of different structures. One of the ones that's really interesting is the Agro Tunnels, which are a geo-sheltered greenhouse. So they have one side exposed with polycarbonate glass or regular glass that allows the sunlight in, and then it's sheltered the rest of the way around with earth. So you can maintain warm temperatures inside, even in extremely cold climates. Another company that's doing earth sheltered house building, and this is just a couple of them. This isn't all of them. But another company that does this is called Terradome, and Terradome has done some work in Oklahoma. One of the first buildings that they built was in northeast Oklahoma, a little bit north of us here. Terradome is a full service company. They come out and they will go with you over the planning stage, do all the construction. They have crews that work all over the country here in the continental United States. They're not cheap, but the advantages to having a geo-sheltered home are definitely worth it. It's storm-proof, fire-proof, bug-proof, costs next to nothing to keep cool in the summer or warm in the winter. So there are a lot of good reasons for using a geo-sheltered house. Hello, Amy at Crete's Family Homestead. How you doing? Take a look at this. All right. I am not sharing my screen. Huh. Back up here. All right, there's a picture of a house on stilts. Well, having a home buried, even partially buried in the earth, isn't practical for all locations. Places where flooding is common, for example, like where I'm at right now, which is on the Arkansas River bottom. Flooding is always a possibility. Just having an earth sheltered home at ground level may not necessarily be a great idea here. We could build an artificial hill or a berm and set it on top of that. But another option would be to build on stilts like you see in this picture here. This is not exactly what I had in mind, but I was shopping for photos and this was about as close as I could come, short of showing an oil drilling rig to what I had in mind. You start out by taking your support structures and driving those down to bedrock. You want to anchor those in bedrock and make them each sufficient to withstand being struck by a truck at least 60 miles an hour. That way, in the case of hurricanes, flooding, tidal waves, so on and so forth, those pillars that the house is built on remain intact. And then, of course, those would extend up above the high water mark, and then you would build your house structure on top of that platform. Now, building it on pylons gets you up above floodwaters, but what do we do about insulation? Before we had a geo-sheltered home, which was really great for heating and cooling, very energy efficient. What do we do in this case? Well, modern technology has come up with some really interesting alternatives in construction materials. So let me share one of them with you. One of them is called foamed concrete. You sometimes hear it referred to as aircrete. It's not exactly new per se. It's been in use primarily for insulation since the 1920s. But there have been some advances in chemistry, which now make it possible to create more durable and uniform air pockets in the material. Modern aircrete has a durability that's very close to regular concrete, but it has an insulating factor that is more than 14 times that of just Earth itself. Put it another way, 1 foot thick of aircrete is as well insulated as being buried 14 feet underground, or R44, if anybody's interested in R values, which is not too shabby. The weight of aircrete per cubic foot varies depending upon the mix, but it falls somewhere between 20 to 60 pounds per cubic foot. If you compare that with the specific gravity of water, which is around 62 pounds per cubic foot, then yes, aircrete floats. So it's light enough to actually float on water and still be as insulated as being buried 14 feet below ground. I think that's a pretty good recommendation for the material. It's fireproof, waterproof, and it doesn't suffer from insect damage either. Hi, Tim. Hey, look, there's Tim. There's Rich Life. Hey, Amy, did I show you this picture? Huh. What do you think? Right? I've wanted a hobbit hole ever since I read that book when I was about 7 or 8 years old. It just seemed like a fantastic idea to me. Of course, now we know that geosheltering is a great way to build a home because it's so energy efficient. I know a lot of people want to, save the planet and hug the trees, but I'm cheap and I don't want to pay more for heating and cooling than is absolutely necessary. And of course, if you're wondering about a grid down situation or some sort of emergency survival situation, having a home that's earth sheltered is really great. Okay, the picture I've got up here is something that was on the drawing board for one of my daughter's science fair projects. We ultimately wound up going with a hand wound electric generator. But I'll tell you a little bit about this. All right, so if we're building a house up on stilts and we're using aircrete to build it, so it has a nice R factor and it's fireproof and waterproof and may block a little bit of radiation too, for that matter. That's all great. And if we can get the temperature comfy on the inside, it'll hold that temperature really well, but we need to get it to that temperature in the first place. And it doesn't have the surrounding uh, thermal value, thermal constant value of Earth around it. But one thing that we can do is borrowing from this concept of a passive geothermal system. This one's completely passive, and it works like this. You have a gooseneck pipe coming up out of the surface here. And if we were in a place that would be flooding a lot, you would run this up to above that high water mark. Okay. So your gooseneck comes up here. The air from the surrounding outside, being slightly warm, would be entering through the gooseneck. And it would power that. Can't talk. It would travel down to anywhere from 10 to 30 feet below the surface of the ground to where we have that constant earth temperature, pass through coils, and then come up to be released inside the house, cooled to between 50 to 60 degrees. Having 50 to 60 degree air traveling through your house during the summer is a wonderful thing. And to be able to do it without electricity is even better. And how it works is right up here at the top. This little arrow looking structure here is actually a stovepipe, 6 to 8 inches in diameter. And it's painted black, not for aesthetic purposes, but because of practicality. Being painted black, it absorbs radiant heat energy. It absorbs the sun's rays and transforms that into heat energy, which heats the air inside the column, which will then exit out under the cap at the top. This creates an area of low pressure inside of your house. The area of low pressure will draw the air in through the gooseneck, through the coils down below, and out into the house as 50 to 60 degree cool air. And the hotter it is outside, the quicker it comes in. That's the concept of a passive cooling system. Well, yeah, exactly. Sassafras says, being thrifty is being environmentally conscious. I'm not a tree hugger because, ooh, I'm concerned about saving the planet. I'm a tree hugger because it just makes sense economically. It really does. There's no need to sugarcoat it. It makes sense, like sense to to invest in passive cooling. You want a Mandan Earth Lodge? Nice. I actually know what that is. I was going to talk about those actually, Sarsaparilla. Um, among the various earth sheltered homes that have been used, particularly here in North America, the earth lodges were used by almost all, not all, but almost all of the indigenous tribes here. In the far northeast, there were ones that were built with corbelled roofs out of stone. Corbelled roofs, which means that they had some sort of material that they packed on the inside after they had excavated around and put the walls up out of stone. They moved material onto the inside of where the house was going to be. And then they stacked the rocks up in a spiral going up till they finally closed in. And the weight of each rock on top of the other held the entire roof in place. And then they just buried it and then removed all the material from the inside. They either pulled it out or if they were using wood, they just burned it. And those structures are still out there in upper state New York and other places like that up in Maine. To this day, you can still walk in the woods and find them. Sassafras Red is psychic or psycho. I'm not sure which. Yeah, probably a little bit of both. A little bit of both. Over there in Skara Brae, Orkney Islands of Scotland, up to 5,000 years ago, there were also very similar houses built along similar lines. And those were also the people that were busily living off of predominantly hazelnuts for their main diet. Hazelnuts and fish and whatever berries and nuts other berries and nuts that they found growing in the area, living in earth sheltered houses. So whenever it was very, very cold out, whenever the circumstances were not great for survival, they were staying nice and cozy inside the earth. And they didn't have caves, so they made their own. There's a beautiful rebuilt full-size mound builder lodge outside. Okay, so somebody went and they reconstructed one of the mounds. That's kind of cool. Well, the people that lived here a long time ago were pretty smart, and they didn't have air conditioning, but they were able to survive brutally hot summers or cruel winters by using geo-sheltered housing. It's in a state park. Yeah, you are what you eat. And they were nuts. Okay. So where am I at with my picture here? Okay, I still have that picture up. All right. Now, the position of the barrel coils for cooling can be as shallow as 10 feet below the surface or as much as 30 feet. And the exact optimal depth is variable from site to site. But the same concept prevents a very interesting possibility. And some of you may already be very familiar with this concept, which is thermoelectricity. Quick show of hands. Has anybody had a gas-powered water heater or a floor furnace or anything like that? Gas-powered. Amy wants a polytunnel. I do too. I want to be able to grow orange trees and vanilla orchids. Rickshaw Project says Icelandic turf lodges are still in use. Yeah, they still are. You can still find them. My grandmother lived in a turf lodge in Kansas whenever she was a kid. So they've been used quite recently. All right. Anybody at all? Anybody? Floor furnace, gas powered, water heater? Nobody? Okay. So you may not be familiar with this. All right. Whenever you're going to light your gas powered water heater, you know how you have to keep on holding the button in. If it's electric ignition, keep holding the button in. Or if you're using a match or a splinter or a flaming splint to keep it lit, you have to keep that fire on. They say for about a minute or so. The reason you have to keep the flame on before you let off on the ignition is because there is an element inside there called a thermocouple, and you're trying to give it enough time for the thermocouple to heat up so that it will continue to produce electricity. What's going on is inside of a thermocouple, there are two dissimilar metals, and it could be something like iron and copper. And where they come together and you apply heat at that junction, it produces an electrical current. The molecules inside of the dissimilar metals are excited. Electrons want to flow away from the source of heat. But since iron is less conductive than copper, the electrons flow slower through the iron, faster through the copper. Whenever they complete the circuit on the other side, now you've got a flow, which is most of the electrons going in one direction. That's a flow of electrons. That's an electrical current. Series of these tied together are called thermopiles, and that's what provides the power to hold the solenoid on your floor furnace or your gas water heater open. Whenever it loses the heat, it lets the valve close so you don't have gas continuing to come out. That's why you have to keep on holding the flame whenever you're lighting your pilot lights. All right. Now here's the cool part. These things can be designed, I've seen them up to 750 millivolts, which is 3/4 of a volt each. So if you were putting them in series, 750 millivolts each, 16 of them would be enough to provide 12 volts DC power. So the way this would work is you'd have your hot end up there on the stack at the roof of the house, right up there. Here, let me just go ahead and bring this up. The hot part would be up here, right? The hot part of your thermopile would be up here, and you can put 1, 2, 3, 4 on each stack. Have 4 stacks across the peak of your roof. That would keep your home cooled. But the other end, you would run your wiring down to the point where your coils are, where the ground temperature is around 50 to 60 degrees. So you have a constant 50 to 60 degrees down here, and you have your heat up here. That difference in temperature provides you with an electrical current with a thermopile. That's not going to be a lot of electrical power. At the moment, I don't know exactly how much it is. I'm going to have to do some additional independent research on this, because as far as I know, nobody is really doing static geothermal electricity using thermopiles. But it's not that far to travel from the peak of the roof down to 10 feet below the ground to have that vast difference in temperature. And if you're having 12 volts DC coming in at all times, you can be recharging your batteries. If you're running a battery bank to run things like LED lights around your house, or run appliances like computers, things of that nature. It's probably not going to power your entire house, but as a supplement to things like solar and wind energy, having something with no moving parts that is just recapturing waste heat sounds like a good idea. And yes, it would trickle charge batteries. And that much power will be enough to light some LED lights around your house. You could have the interior of your home lit continuously with LED lights, with a system that just has no moving parts and requires no maintenance. I kind of like that concept. All right. So if you are ready to become a high-tech caveman, or cavewoman for that matter, or just want to know a little bit more about some of these topics, materials, construction designs, I'm going to drop a few links for you here that will further enhance your exploration and enjoyment. The first link here is for a channel called Honeydew Carpenter, who does a lot of work with Crete, including a schematic and diagram and how to build your own foam generator if you wanted to make your own aircrete from scratch at home. It's not too expensive to put the setup together. We're looking at around 150, 200 bucks, and I believe he actually sells those, or he did at one time sold the foam generation unit. So you don't even have to build it yourself. He'll build it for you, and pay him a couple $100. He'll build the entire unit. All right, that's one. The next one is a fellow by the name of Aircrete Harry. Well, that's the channel name. And Aircrete Harry does freestanding aircrete domes. Earth hungry and cheap living can coexist very well. Hey, it makes economic sense to me. If it didn't make economic sense, it'd be like, yeah, that'd be nice, but it's not practical. The fact that it makes economic sense makes it practical. So no reason not to do it. Okay, so this link here is for Aircrete Harry, and he does freestanding domes. He actually takes a Tyvek form that he sews and then inflates it and then shoots the aircrete around the outside of it. So there's no beams, no supports, no internal structure at all. It's just a freestanding dome whenever he's done with it. Very cool stuff. All right, and last, I've got a link for this fellow here. If you were interested in learning about human habitats from an actual rocket scientist, this is Galactic Greg's. That is Greg Allison's channel where he deals with space and other such interesting science-related topics. One of the things that he's done a lot of work on is a universal habitat, which includes a greenhouse built into a geo-sheltered dwelling. So it's kind of like a combination of that geo-sheltered polytunnel plus a geo-sheltered house. That guy is a nutter. Yeah, he's crazy in the good way though. And there we go. Tonight wasn't too long, was it? Go back through our pictures here. I'll end on the dinosaurs. So the next time some major global climate changing event occurs, probably not man-made, folks, we could either stick our heads in the sand and go, well, I guess we need to reduce our carbon footprints, or we could actually use our intelligence and ingenuity and adapt to changing climate, which is the path that I personally would recommend that we do. And part of that is going and looking at some of the things that have worked for us in the past. Just because they're old ideas doesn't mean they're not still good ideas. And now that we have some advanced technology that we can apply, we can make them even better. Hey, that's all I've got for you tonight, good people. As always, if you found the video informative or entertaining, you know what to do. I will catch you next time. I will probably be doing a Q&A section, Q&A segment next Wednesday. But Mr. Fuller is awesome. Guy's got his head screwed on tight. I'm thinking next week we'll do a Q&A, sort of a free form. So thumbs up for opposable thumbs. So you guys ask me questions and I'll answer them to the best of my ability, or break out Google and we'll live search them or something like that. And we'll do that next Wednesday, and then possibly a week after that, maybe. What are you supposed to do for the next 2 hours? I don't know. You could go watch old live streams. I know. I didn't have a full 2 hours worth of material to show you this week. We were really busy this week. We spent 3 days getting the carport and garage area cleaned out. I've got a 25 cubic yard dumpster sitting out there in the driveway that's packed all the way to the top with junk. So we were doing property cleanup, and I didn't have time to work on too much. You don't get to be sarcastic and playback. Well, there's always comments. You can leave comments below, and you can leave snarky comments. See, it all works out. And if you're a paying member, I'll actually respond to them. I'll probably respond to them anyway. All right, guys, I will catch you next week, 7 p.m. live Q&A session, and then the week after that, 7 p.m. Probably going into complex adaptive systems. So we talked about human habitats this week, and then week after next, we'll be talking about reorganizing civilization. actually, which is going to be fun. All right. Thank you for joining me tonight. You guys have a wonderful evening. Bye bye.